The entire house just exploded around me. I remember being struck everywhere on my body, cuts, bangs, bruises. People liken the sound of a tornado to a freight train. In the middle of an F-5, a freight train is a whisper compared to the sound. I could taste the blood, the dampness, the debris, but I couldn't hear my own screams.
Hello everyone, my name is Eno. I'm a Twitch streamer VTuber, and well, I lived through the Joplin tornado, and this is my friend here.
Hello, my name is Pogo. I don't do anything really of interest, but I also went through the Joplin tornado.
So Pogo and I have two sides of the same story, but I think I'll start with kind of just the context of what was going on at the time. So May 2011, in the same time period, there was the Harold Camping Rapture thing that was going on. So Joplin is a very religious town, so a lot of people were like, "Oh, on May 21st, we're all gonna go to heaven, and all the sinners are gonna die or whatever." So, strangely enough, I'd already said all of my goodbyes to my friends at the high school that previous day. But to us, it was kind of strange because it's like the end of the world was the day after. So I don't remember too much about the day itself. I just remember how quick it was. So at the time of the storm, I remember that I was in my bedroom just like on my iPod and just looking at like various Final Fantasy things. And then I noticed that my Wi-Fi went out. First world problems. But so I go into the other room and then I see this live newscast that said that there was a tornado that was spotted like X amount of miles to the west. And the thing with Joplin and just the general vicinity of that area is that we get tornado warnings and watches all the time. So it's kind of a commonplace thing. Like we just ignore it. It's like, oh, it's probably like 30 miles north of here. It'll never hit us. So we kind of treated it the same way. Like it wasn't going to hit us. We were going to be okay. So then my mom goes outside and then the door actually pushed back in because of the pressure. So she got pushed back as the door was opening. So that's not normal. So because we got the warnings, we went into the basement a little bit after that, and we just kind of hid there for a few hours. And I remember looking out the window and just seeing the trees just like I've seen like crazy winds, like whether it be in the wintertime, the spring, or fall. But this was so bad that it almost looked like they were going to bend over. And it was like this, I can't describe it. It was like this end of the world green. It was almost like a limeish green color in the sky that I recall. So we went back upstairs, and the news report was saying that Joplin was hit with a tornado, and then on the live camera, we see like this big black cloud just covering the center of Joplin. So we didn't actually know until just a little bit after that that the storm had actually did as much damage as it did. So I go back into my bedroom and I'm playing like Fallout 3 or like Call of Duty or something. And then my mom comes in and has us turn on the radio because she got a text from one of her friends that said, "Hey, are you guys okay? Joplin was hit with a huge storm." So we're just sitting there listening to the radio and we hear this radio broadcaster saying, "Oh, the high school's gone. People are driving over power lines, and like I don't even know where I am right now." And I'm just sitting to myself thinking like, "Wait, what do you mean the high school is gone?" So I couldn't believe what I was hearing because when you have a location that you go to like on a day-to-day basis and you're familiar with it, it's just hard to believe whenever all that is gone. It's just wiped off the map. So I want to say about like 9 o'clock that night, that's when all the footage came in from various points in town. And I just saw that my high school was just gone. Like every little thing that I was familiar with on a day to day basis was just gone. And I was fortunate that we didn't really receive too much damage in the storm. Like, we went outside and there was just like a bunch of debris in our yard. There were some branches that fell down. So I counted me and my family very fortunate. However, my great grandmother ended up losing her house, which was a whole nother cleanup process. But I was lucky to have gotten probably the least of it. Pogo, on the other hand, his experience was a bit more direct, so I'm going to pass it over to you, Pogo.
Thank you. It was definitely a different side of the coin for me. I, at the time, was a morning show director for a local news station, so my routine around the time of whenever the tornado hit, roughly 5:30 p.m., I would typically, at that point, go to Starbucks, get 6 shots of espresso and stick them in the fridge for the next morning because, when you've got to be at work at 3 in the morning, you need that extra kick. So I was in the process of getting ready for that and heard the wind pick up. I don't recall any tornado sirens, anything like that. And I noticed as I was getting ready, the wind was like nothing I'd heard before. So at that point, I knew there was clearly something wrong, and I took off running to the center of the house. And as Ina stated, living in the Midwest, you hear about Tornado Alley, really. You constantly hear about tornado warnings, watches, all of that. And it's not that you don't pay it any mind, it's just kind of a norm. If a zookeeper were to work with dangerous animals all the time, they can't predict when that animal might attack. So as I took off in the middle of the house, I dove to about where the bathroom was, most standing walls and whatnot. We didn't have a basement or cellar or anything like that. And if we did, I would not have had time to even get there. But at that point, the entire house just exploded around me. And I remember do have vivid memories from it, and those came back, little by little, months after the tornado. But I remember just being struck everywhere on my body, cuts, bangs, bruises, and people liken the sound of a tornado to a freight train. And I have to say, being in the middle of an F-5, a freight train is a whisper compared to the sound, because I screamed to the point that I could taste blood. I remember I could taste the blood, the dampness, the debris, but I couldn't hear my own screams. The wind was just that deafening. I was in the fetal position, and something struck me really hard on the left side, which ended up breaking my radial and ulnar bone in my left arm, as well as causing a compound fracture in the tibia and femur. And I later found out it sent my kneecap off like a frisbee, most likely. And at that point, I ragdolled from the sheer amount of pain. And I remember being picked up by the tornado at that point. And I don't know how long I was in the air, but eventually I was pinned to what was remaining of the neighbor's tree, just the bare stump of it. And I remember the sound being muffled by the debris piling on top of me. At that point, something struck me in the back of the head really hard. I find that something to be fortunate about, which is strange. It led to a skull fracture, but because of that, I don't remember any of the aftermath. So in that aspect, I consider myself quite lucky because I didn't have to see the destruction, the carnage that the tornado left. As a result, I was in a coma for 4 days, and I woke up. They had put me on a med flight up to Kansas City, and I woke up 4 days later with my left leg amputated, not knowing where I was, what had happened. It was a few years later that the movie How to Train Your Dragon came out, and the scene where Hiccup looks down and see the sheet laying flat. Spoilers for anybody that hasn't seen it, I apologize. But it's much like that, waking up and not knowing where you were, what had happened, and seeing something so abnormal as looking down, and where a part of you once was, it's just gone. The nurse at the time, she came up and talked to me and said that about a third of the town had been completely obliterated, and unfortunately I was in it, and as a result lost my leg. My first question after knowing that, because I lived with my family, was, is everyone okay? And fortunately, I learned that everybody in my family was perfectly fine, that fortunately I was the only one at home at the time. And at that point I just sighed and said, it's just a leg, and then passed back out. It was a very surreal experience, and something 12 years later, despite me telling this story many times, it's still rather hard to kind of look back on. But it's important to share these experiences so that people know how to better deal with trauma or to learn from it. It's important for stories to be shared, and that's why Eno and I are both here.
Yeah, and like we said, we both have this significant life event, but we both have two sides of the same coin. So he was directly involved with it, but me, it was more the aftermath and the years afterward that I was involved in. So at the time, I was in high school, so I was attending JHS at the time. Because it was a Sunday, nobody was there, thankfully. So after the storm, we've got multiple schools that are out of commission, just completely wiped off the map. So the school district had to make a decision. What are we going to do? Like, where are we going to send our kids for the fall semester? I don't remember exactly how they managed to pull this off, but they took an old middle school that was one of the older schools in the area and turned it into the 9 and 10 campus, which was where the freshmen and sophomores would attend. And then they found an old store in the mall, an old Shopco building that they renovated and turned into a temporary school for the 11th and 12th graders. So the problem that I had was that I had to attend all three of those. So I started off in the original high school, and then the next year I moved to that temporary facility at the middle school, and then after that I got moved over to the temporary high school that was at the mall. So it was kind of a transitionary period for me for quite a number of years, and because we lost so much in that storm, the school district had to essentially, like, what are we going to do as far as our teaching materials go? We don't have any textbooks because they all got lost in the storm. So the UAE, seeing the Joplin tornado story, donated 500 grand to the school district to buy laptops for all the students. Now, that does seem okay on paper because it's like, oh, it's a new form of learning. We'll be the pioneers in this 21st century learning facility. But the problem was that the teachers were just not prepared to switch their curriculum over to fully digital. And the problem with that is that it really affected my education in a negative way because the teachers didn't really want to teach me. And like a lot of the curriculum was just stuff that they pulled off of the internet, like Khan Academy, stuff like that. So I didn't feel like I was learning anything. The thing with Joplin schools in general is that when the cameras left and the media attention had kind of died down, that's whenever like the true colors had come to light as far as Joplin and then the school district is concerned. Just because the tornado happened and the community came together with resilience and hope doesn't mean that the bad people just randomly disappeared overnight. Joplin has always been in the bottom 30% of every educational subject in the state and also the country, as far as I'm aware, and they still to this day continue the laptop trend, which I would imagine still contributes to a lot of kids falling behind on their education. However, the school itself, like the temporary facility, was very interesting. So there's a little bit of stuff on YouTube that you can see of inside the school, but there's a lot of things that weren't really shown in the media. What I recall is, of course, it was an old mall shopping center. So you'd go in, and then there's the classrooms were not up to the roof because the way that the building was constructed, you couldn't put a wall up to the top because there was like air conditioning and heaters and stuff up there, almost like a warehouse. The problem with like all of the classes was since they didn't have walls that go up to the ceiling, you would hear like so-and-so doing their math lecture or somebody watching a movie in their class. So it kind of became very distracting. We had these little areas called think tanks, which were these soundproof rooms where you can go into your studying, things like that. We also had a coffee shop in the lunchroom as well. But the problem was that since it was connected to the mall, there was a lot of people that would just leave the building, go into the mall, go to the food court, come back in. So technically the rule set for that was that you can't go to the mall and go to the food court. You have to eat at the school. But because the school was corrupt inherently, like the popular kids would just come in through the lunchroom anyway with food from the food court. I even saw the principal unlock the door for them multiple times. But when I tried to do it or someone else tried to do it, we get an earful about how we're not allowed to go to the mall. That's kind of just the basic summary of that experience. I guess I can move on to kind of like the FEMA part because Pogo has some experience with FEMA as well. My grandfather worked
yes.
for FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. It's basically a federal entity that whenever a natural disaster or just any form of disaster happens, it allows the government to come in and do recovery operations quickly. So my grandfather was a recertification specialist for FEMA trailers that were brought in shortly after the storm. But the problem is that people would abuse these homes because they were essentially rent-free. So his job was basically to every month check in to see if they had some sort of plan of action for their housing situation. Had they gotten a job? Had they figured out like what they're going to do? But as I said earlier, just because we had hope in our community doesn't mean the bad people disappeared. There were multiple instances of these FEMA trailers being used as meth labs. There was an incident where my grandfather was inspecting a FEMA trailer and somebody just would refuse to take their trash out. So they shoved all the trash in the walls, under the FEMA trailer itself, under their bed. It was insanitary. There was like, I think in that same FEMA trailer, there was a black widow nest as well under there, probably because they could thrive in all that trash. But there was a lot of bad things that happened in those trailers. And Pogo had an experience with FEMA as well shortly afterward that I'll go ahead and toss it over to him for.
FEMA and other organizations put in place to help during natural disasters did little to nothing to help me and my family. Once I got back to Joplin, being bandaged and stuff like that, and my mom and dad wheeling me into the office for FEMA for them to hopefully help somehow, whether it be temporary housing, whether it be monetary help in any sort of way. Since my parents were renting at the time, I believe the check that they offered them was $174 to basically rebuild your entire life that you've lost. $174. For me, they offered absolutely nothing. Because I neither rented nor owned a home, so I suppose at that point, I was unimportant for natural disaster relief of any sort. So for our experience, it was absolutely useless. And as Zeno said, like there were so many places out of commission. The high schools and the hospital was heavily hit and stuff, and the town did have to make do with what very little we had, but at the same time, I feel a lot of opportunity was squandered and taken advantage of. In the instance of the Red Cross, they also offered no help whatsoever. I believe it was because we had finally gotten into my aunt's house and stayed there until we were able to find a different residence. So they considered us completely fine and savvy, taken care of. And the only thing that the Red Cross offered me was a backpack with a blanket and a wind-up radio / flashlight, because that's sure to save your life if another tornado were to pass through. That's plenty to rebuild your life off of. And I have to admit, I'm a bit ignorant on things that, say, FEMA and the Red Cross have to offer families in these situations, but to have nothing to build your life off of after losing everything, you feel lost, desperate, and not knowing where to go. If it weren't for the good people, the community, if it weren't for friends and my former places of employment, say I used to work at Starbucks part-time, and while a big corporate giant, they do offer some good things. And I hadn't been employed with them for quite some time, but they offer a thing called the Cup Fund, where when you get hired on, you can say, I would like to donate $1 of my paycheck, each paycheck, to this Cup Fund for employees in need. Say if they were to need a life-saving surgery or anything like that, or going through natural disaster. Because of a very, very kind manager up in Kansas City who had heard about my story, because of her, that was the only way that my family had clothes put on their backs. That was the only way that certain bills were paid, because she talked to corporate and got me back on the Cup Fund. And it helped out my family tremendously. My previous place of employment, the TV station, it had some insurance money or disaster relief money, and so many employees decided to forego their part despite receiving damages so that they could donate that to me. Friends had set up the equivalent of a GoFundMe page. With that money, I gave that to my parents, and that's how we rebuilt our life. Not from these companies that are intended for that very purpose. As I said, they were of little to no use. $174? That's laughable. It was astounding that so little help came from these places. And as Eno said, once the hype died down, once it lost its glitz and glamour for being broadcast in the mainstream spotlight, really all interest was gone. The money went to places where it shouldn't have. The high school was rebuilt with gigantic glass windows, as if that's supposed to be something that is secure in another unfortunate event like that. It was put towards just incredibly superfluous places instead of proper infrastructure, instead of really helping out the community. It was put in these needless places. It was just a waste.
That's kind of going to segue into what I was going to say, is that most of my experience was in the aftermath with the school district itself. There was a leaked recording of the superintendent at the time. Whether or not this was a joke or out of context, I'm not sure, but there were a lot of rumors about misused funds and embezzlement. If I recall, the leaked recording was the superintendent saying something along the lines of the millions of donations that we got from the Joplin tornado. I can't tell you where those funds are, or I'll go to jail, or something along those lines. And there were tons of stories coming out at the time of this man taking trips to different places around the country for quote unquote thanking people for their donations, using the money that they were donating to us for that purpose. So there was a lot of mismanagement of money, just like Pogo said. And a big issue that we had was that a lot of the mom and pop stores that we had in the area didn't open back up because when they were destroyed, they didn't have any means to repair because they're mom and pop store, they're self-sufficient. They don't have all these specialty corporate insurances. So chains started coming in and replacing all of these mom and pop shops and stores. So we'd get like Walmarts, we'd get like all these new restaurants, like just fast food giants like Five Guys and Popeyes and things like that. But it just kind of took away the identity of Joplin itself by bringing in all of these corporate entities and essentially just making us like Americaville, basically. But as far as like on the tornado itself, like the day of, it was also on graduation day for the class of 2011. So I don't remember the exact timing, but it was shortly after the ceremony ended that the tornado hit the town. And there was a gentleman by the name of Will Norton who was, I didn't know him personally, but I saw him in the school, and he was a pretty popular kid, but he was a YouTuber at the time, and he had the capacity to be one of the YouTube pantheon. He had very like early Smosh energy, very very talented television production guy, and he was driving in his Hummer shortly after the tornado with his dad, and he was sucked out of the vehicle. And there was a whole search effort that was done for him, and he wasn't found until about like 3 days later, face down in a pond a couple miles away. I didn't know him personally, but I wish I could have, because I know I can't really change fate, but I saw more and more of this person's work as I was in that television program, which is kind of what inspired me to get into VRChat and stuff like that. There's a memorial field named after him and everything. So the tornado itself was a multi-vortex tornado. So basically what this means is that this big wall cloud that you see is not the main storm. So it's basically kind of like a facade or an illusion, if you will, covered with debris and wind. So inside of this giant cloud is going to be multiple smaller vertices. So basically, you have like 2 or 3 tornadoes in one with varying degrees of wind speed. That's why some areas of Joplin weren't as damaged as others, because they would get this one little inner vortex that hit that was only like, say, like an F2 strength, and then others would get the full F5 strength. It was just a freak of nature storm. It formed so quick. It took like maybe like a minute for the thing to fully form. It was rough.
Well, they had predicted it being further away from Joplin and predicted also, it traveling more north of Joplin. It was an extremely unpredictable storm cell. There were a lot of reports, and I believe a lot of deaths on the fact that it was reported as being north of Joplin, so a lot of people didn't seek shelter. And that's not anything against the meteorologists and stuff at the time or storm chasers. It was just such a violent, as Ina said, violent and extremely unpredictable freak of nature.
The day of, it's kind of strange when I think about it in retrospect, because at the time, my parents had had like a party the night before, so they had probably been hungover a little bit, just didn't want to do anything. So we ended up eating dinner probably like 3:40. The tornado happened at 5:41. On any other Sunday, we probably would have gotten pizza or something at either Domino's or Pizza Hut, which were directly hit. So I don't know if there's like some sort of like entity out there that was watching over us that day, but thankfully, because my parents had a party the night before, we didn't end up going to one of these restaurants at the time the storm hit. And there's just so many weird coincidences that happened in that time frame. So overall, I just feel like because most of the stuff that I was used to, like the high school and these restaurants and these local community places, were just gone, it just took a long time for me to kind of process what had happened and that my life had changed. And it wasn't until years later that I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, because I don't want to call it survivor's guilt or anything like that, but I do have that sense of guilt for not having been affected like, say, Pogo had been. Really every month I'll have a dream of that storm. There was one recently I had where I went outside and I just saw the tornado above my apartment complex, and other times where I'm under debris. It just haunts me. Almost not every day, but fairly regularly, I have dreams of that, and I can't even drive when it's raining, hardly.
I have to say, while they weren't, say, affected as severely as I was, my biggest thing is that it's not a pissing contest. Say a person could have received a scratch or just been missing a shingle, while its others were absolutely eviscerated, lost everything. Friends, family members, loved ones, close ones, limbs, their lives. No matter how you were affected, no matter what you lost within that, it's such a significant part of everybody's lives in Joplin and surrounding areas that we're always watching the sky at the slightest bit of dark clouds, uh, rain, thunder. I believe almost everybody around here, unless they're very foolish, thinks they're greater than the forces of Mother Nature.
Yeah, and because the years go by, a lot of the details get lost. And nowadays, people have just been really comfortable posting just the most insane conspiracy theories about whatever on the internet. But I was driving through the area because I am no longer a Joplin resident. I went into a store that had a memorial set up for one of their employees that had passed away in the storm. And as I'm like using the bathroom, there's next to the memorial, there's this older man who's just looking at it like this. And he's like, "Did you know that tornado was man-made? It is whether you want to admit it or not." Because like there was this whole conspiracy theory that the government used HARP or whatever to cause the storm, and it was a test
That's right.
bed
You
or
gotta
something.
blame that 5G. It's after all of us. No, as Zena said, just conspiracy theories abound. It's with anything and everything these days. You get the reports of quote-unquote fake media and all of that. And while media is altered in some aspects, people go way, way too far with these things and just deny the absolute truth that this disaster happened, and it's devastating for anyone and everyone involved. It's insulting that people, as Zena said, would discount both that experience and the victims that have had to suffer.
Hello, Editing Azil here. Sometimes OBS just does a funny thing where it completely destroys the audio, so a couple seconds from now you are going to hear a very strange sound. It is not your headphones, that is on me, and once it goes away there will be a bit of a weird sudden cut and we will be back to normal. Thank you.
So there's more about just the school district in general that I'd like to touch on. So there was a student by the name of Zachary Williams. He was supposed to be the class of 2016, and he was probably one of the youngest victims of the storm. And he was, of course, going to graduate in 2016, so his parents wanted to have the school district set up like a chair for him to kind of memorialize him and his memory. Just like, okay, he graduated, he made it, a memorial for him. But the school district refused their request multiple times because they gave just a blanket excuse as to why they can't give an extra seat for this child that had passed away in the storm. And so the parents had to get a community effort put together to get a memorial or a faux graduation for this child that had passed away in the storm. And the eerie thing is, when I looked at my old yearbooks before we did this interview, I found him in my 5th grade yearbook. And so I was looking through my signatures and I had found that he had written in my yearbook, which just kind of breaks my heart because I have a little bit of memory of this guy when I was in elementary school, but now I just seeing how his family was mistreated by the school district, not even allowing him to have a seat at graduation, is just awful.
It's unfortunate that in so many aspects that something like this can be taken advantage of for others' gain, that being, the school district, the city of Joplin, Westboro, and other people. I mean, it wasn't unless you were rich beforehand that you really got any help. And so it just opened a door for them to take advantage of it and use it as their own gain. Meanwhile, people like Eno and myself are suffering throughout.
It just amazes me how much of this money just went missing, and it hurts whenever I see like a story or some lifestyle show that talks about the resilience of the Joplin community. But to be honest with you, Joplin is probably one of the most unfriendliest towns I've ever had the displeasure to live in. It's Midwest, lower Midwest, so it's almost borderline Southern, but everyone there is just so unfriendly.
Yeah, you can tell who has true compassion and who's feigning compassion. Say, the rich, pompous bastards and stuff like that who only profited from this disaster or whatever. They'll wear that smile like a mask and tell you everything you want to hear and then stab you in the back later. People that truly suffered through it, people that know what it's like, they're the ones that you can at least trust in. As I said, it was It was a lot of people that were affected themselves that were truly the backbone of this town. Few and far between, but truly the backbone of it. They were the ones that brought it to some semblance of being able to be tolerable, or as it was before, with still that heavy cloud lingering overhead. Unfortunately, the people that make the decisions, unfortunately, the people whose voices are louder are the corrupt ones.
And I don't want to kind of say that Joplin was all negative, because there were instances that there were good things that came after. It's like, I think it was called the Memorial Run or something, where I think it's a yearly event where they put like the names of all the people that passed away in the storm, and it's like a 5K marathon run or something along those lines. So there is something there where people can remember and respect the people who were lost. On the site of the hospital that was destroyed, there was a park that was created called Mercy Park. It's got little bits of debris on this little art mural. There's a lake. It's gorgeous. They planted a lot of trees there, and that's kind of the way that they remember that.
Butterfly garden as well, and such. And I actually participated for a couple of years in the charitable run and everything like that, the memorial run, which, having lost my leg is quite difficult. I had one of those fancy running blades and everything, and it's quite difficult for someone in my position, being an above the knee amputee as opposed to below the knee amputee. Much harder to control, so fell quite a bit, but years of falling, you tend to master it, much like a stunt double or such. But I stopped attending once I realized that it wasn't so much for the community. I mean, it did start with good intentions, but it evolved into something as, let's be seen, let's celebrate how much these officials and whatnot help the community, and just give those big wigs a pat on the back for what a wonderful job they did, when it was, again, the people that were affected.
Yeah, and I remember we had tons of people from news and meteorologists and people like that. Like Mike Bettis from the Weather Channel was the first one to come into the area, and he burst into tears the moment that he saw the devastation. I remember the next day looking out my back window, and I saw Black Hawk helicopters that were flying over the area because Al Roker from the Today Show was observing the damage. We also had President Obama come and speak at one of the local places, just to kind of like give us motivation, like the government is here for you, which they really weren't. Then he came and spoke at the 2012 graduation, and just thinking back on all that me and Pogo have been through, it's just, where's the humanity? Like, what happened to the humanity that we had? And it's a shame anytime I'm in the area and just see there's just a lack of trees everywhere still. You can tell, like, certain areas where the storm hit, there's still plenty of empty lots that nobody ever rebuilt in. There's still maybe a few houses that are still damaged that were never torn down. And I want to say it's a very similar experience to what people in New Orleans felt after Katrina, just feeling abandoned by the authorities, basically. Like, once the cameras left, that we had no use. Like, it's on to the next story. Like, oh, like, there's this person who made big on Wall Street. Like, more, like, news at 11. Like, here's your sports. Like, everybody just forgot about it until it's brought up in the news again, and even the local news would just milk the story and try to, like, for ratings. Even the people that reported on the storm at the time are complicit in reporting and showing that, like, this intentional tearjerker stuff just for ratings. It's not genuine, because obviously to protect our identities, like, we were involved in some of that stuff, and we know the people that are saying these things on the news are not genuine at all. They're just saying it for ratings.
On the 10-year anniversary, that's whenever I agreed to do my final interview, that being on the news side of things. It was a TV station in Kansas City that interviewed me first, and then another one up there, only 2 days after I woke up from the coma. And the local TV station, obviously, they wanted to do an interview as well. And I told them both, I will do it only under the condition that I'm going to tell the truth of it, that I'm going to not sugarcoat it. I'm not going to put on a fake smile. I'm not going to say everything's okay, because it's not. It's been hell, personally. I mean, just the journey of healing physically, mentally, and saying, as Eno said, the corruption that grew from this. And say a lot of the houses that were bought up by real estate agents or organizations, it's surprising to learn how few of them have a basement, have a tornado safe place for people to go, because they were popping those up as quickly as possible. Mind you, that's a good thing for families needing a home. But if they're put together haphazardly, if it's just put together by plywood and nothing else, duct tape and a hope and a dream, you're screwed if another tornado or anything like that comes through again. While the visits of, let's say, celebrities or well-known personalities, such as Al Roker, were celebrated and did bring more attention to it, I actually have a personal story about Al Roker taking advantage of his stay here. My mother, worked at a hotel shortly before she passed in 2017. She had heard stories from her coworkers that whenever Al Roker came to report on this, he rented out an entire floor of the hotel room so that he would not be bothered by fans. So there are people sleeping in streets. There are people sleeping in, the dilapidated ruins of their homes, their cars or what's left of them. Meanwhile, he's rented out an entire floor just so he won't be pestered. Him with a film crew, that would maybe take, 3-4 rooms maybe? But an entire floor? That's nonsense. So while there are, say, silver linings to a lot of the stories that you might hear, the interior of these things are just rusted, grimy, and corrupt. And it's not with Joplin in this situation alone. It's with every natural disaster, as Eno mentioned, say with Katrina, and the recent fires in Hawaii and stuff like that. It's not enough is being done. Not enough attention is being put to where it needs to go.
See, I heard about the hotel thing, but I didn't know it was bad. I just knew that all the hotel rooms in Joplin area were taken. Like, there was no place you could get a hotel room, even at the cheap places. Everyone was picked up.
And it wasn't just hotel rooms, it was apartment complexes as well. A guy that I dated a while back, his family is rich beyond belief. It's ridiculous. But they own quite a few apartment complexes. And mysteriously, after the tornado hit, those rates to get an apartment suddenly spiked, and they were actually sued by that, I believe, so that they can make more profit from this disaster. How monstrous is that? What a vile person you have to be to take advantage of this. And I'm just in disbelief. I could picture myself, if I were fortunate enough to be that wealthy or own those properties or anything, I would be putting them up for free or at a discounted rate. It's ridiculous. It's inhumane. And again, as stated, there's corruption in so many places of this, and it's wild. It makes your head spin.
I think the best way to put it is that the story didn't end when the cameras left. It just kept going and going and going, and it was a nice breeding ground for more corruption and exploitation of people who lost their homes. And it just got worse and worse and worse. And I can only imagine what it's like for other people, like in the survivors of Katrina or fires in Hawaii or even California. I can only imagine how bad it is there too, with seeing the sheer utter incompetence of government agencies to take care of this issue, and the school district for mismanaging so much money and basically fucking my education up completely. Because they just didn't know how to teach with this new curriculum.
But my dear, that is one beautiful dead horse, so why not beat it as much as we can?
Precisely. I think my closing statement that I would say on just all of this in general is that not everybody in Joplin is bad, of course. We came together, we rise from the ashes, and we rebuilt, but as time went on, just people really forgot what brought us together in the first place. And that's one of the reasons why I left the town, is because they allowed the tornado to define them a little too much. And the disaster itself, they didn't allow anything else to define them, like, oh, we've got this rich history, we've got all these different things, like this celebrity was born here, something like that. No, it's just Joplin is forever labeled as the tornado town. And that's part of the reason why I left, because it's not the same. Not when I was growing up, anyway. Do you have any last things to say, Pogo?
It's a reiteration of both of what you've said and I've said, where it's the people within Joplin, the people who count, the ones that recognize the pain and trauma, the ones that truly realize the hardships of others, not the ones trying to take advantage of it, not the faces you see on TV, not the ones beating that dead horse. It is the small community of those who continuously suffer and will until the end of their days, that are going to be the ones that you can trust in, know that have your backs and support you, much like Eno and myself.
Yeah, we're best friends for life.
Hell yeah.
Tell me a story, I wanna hear it. You might think it's boring, but I'm interested.